Once again, my camera decided to spontaneously turn itself off. Not sure why it did that, but so we have VCL-10-56R, and we're going to get a mass. Looks like stabilizing at 8.259 grams. 8.259 gram for the beaker that we will transfer that solid in to let it dry. Set that aside for now. So that's been sitting there for a little while. I'm going to call it good enough. Let's wipe the water off so I don't get it in the flask, or in the funnel I mean. So we wipe that down with cold ethyl acetate. Swirl that up and pour it through fairly rapidly. So we're collecting that white solid, and then I'm going to rinse with cold ethyl acetate a couple of times, try to get the remaining solid out of the flask. Don't get stuck on the walls. And finally, I'm just going to rinse that filter cake with the ice cold ethyl acetate just to get any residual N-phenylmaleimide or cyclohexadiene, a couple of milliliters. We'll lose a little bit of compound that way, but not very much. So ethyl acetate, we'll let that evaporate in the back. So you can see it's a nice white powdery solid, and the filtrate is slightly yellow, but not hugely. Probably a little bit of unreacted N-phenylmaleimide, not very much. Just let a little air go through that. Ethyl acetate's quite volatile, so in this case we don't really need to store it in the desiccator. We got to transfer that and weigh it and get a yield pretty much immediately. Grab a spatula. Ethyl acetate can go back. I'm going to add N-phenylmaleimide to the organic waste. Since we know we have a little bit of that in there, ethyl acetate's always on the list. Bring my filtrate over there in a minute. So that's probably fairly dry. Gently break the vacuum. Now we will scoop that white solid, fairly large quantities of it, into the beaker. It's a very light, low density solid. Filter paper looks like it wants to go with it, so I'm going to let it. I'll pull it out with some tweezers in a second here. Grab that filter paper and scrape the last little bit of solid off it. It's not really dirty. Just give it a quick wipe. So we can take this solid over and get a mass so we can get a % yield. And we're looking at 9.074 grams, maybe 9.075 grams. It went up a little bit. 9.075 grams, the beaker with the label in the solid. So the only thing left to do with this now is to collect an NMR spectrum. I can't do that until the NMR is working again. So in the meantime, because I can, got room in the desiccator, I'm just going to add that to the other compounds in the desiccator. Just get any traces of moisture that might actually be with it out of there. Make sure it doesn't fall over. And then we'll get NMR data when we can. Give that a quick spin. And all we need to do now is dispose of the waste. And that finishes the Diels Alder reaction. I think if you hold this up against the white background, you can see there is still some yellow. So there's obviously some unreacted phenylmaleimide, since we at least were trying to have a 1-to-1 ratio of cyclohexadiene to N-phenylmaleimide. But the Diels Alder reaction is reversible, so there's probably some equilibrium going on. So that's the end of that one.